All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at today. My name is Jennifer Castleson. I'm the Vice President of Ambassador and Industry Partner Programs at Build Exact. And we are really excited about being able to bring you guys content that is relevant to what's happening in the marketplace today. And in particular about introducing Raul Cavazos, who's the Vice President of Business Development and Food Services at J.B. Hunt Transport Services. He's been there since 1999. And as you all are probably very much aware, J.B. Hunt Transport is a Fortune 500 and S&P 500 company that offers transportation and logistics services for customers across the country. Raul has been there, like I said, since 1999 and has had a variety of leadership roles. So without further ado, I'm very honored that he's able to join us today, and I've seen his presentation and there's a lot of information. So I'm going to let him go ahead and get started. And please join me in welcoming Raul. And if anybody has questions throughout the conversation or throughout his presentation, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I will pop on after his presentation and we'll have a broader discussion about that. So thanks again for joining us and welcome, Raul.
Hi, thank you everyone. And I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I'm going to go through this presentation. As Jennifer indicated, there's quite a bit of content here. We tried to cover topics that we were told were relevant and of interest to everyone on the call. So we're going to go through the presentation and its contents. At the end of the presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session. So don't get too concerned if there's a topic that you think maybe I needed to expand on a little bit more, or if you have additional questions on, we'll just jot those questions down, or as Jennifer suggested, put them in the Q&A and we'll try and address those at the end of the session. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and get started in sharing the content of the presentation. If you guys could just let me know, if somebody can give me a thumbs up if you can see the content and the screen sharing that I've got on the media.
It's all good, Raul. Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this is really opportune timing in terms of the timing of this presentation and the content. As of right now, the industry may be in a little bit of a flux, and it's something that has really developed over just the past several weeks. But before we get too far down that road, I'll start by just covering some very high-level topics related to what's going on in the industry and some of the indicators and statistics that are important to us and that we're constantly looking at to make sure that we're keeping a close eye on what's happening within our space. So these are kind of general market indicators that we look at on a regular basis. At the far top left of the screen is we look at capacity and capacity utilization in the industry. We look at it on a historical basis, and we also look at the trend line on how well the available capacity within the domestic space is being utilized. We look at to the top right. We also keep an eye on what truck rates are doing. These are spot market and contract rates that we're looking at, and this data is actually is sourced through external sources. We also, of course, need to keep a close eye on what's happening with diesel prices. Obviously, fuel prices in the last couple of months have been at the top of everyone's list of concerns, given what's happened with energy prices since Russia invaded the Ukraine. And then on the bottom right, we look at the industry and how well the industry is doing related to the supply of drivers that we need to sustain ourselves as an industry The driver shortage has been something that that's been a hot topic for several years. I'm going to get into a lot deeper context on what's driving, no pun intended, the driver shortage and what those causes are, and then also share some insights on what we believe the outlook is in the years to come related to that. But my opening comment was that these are quite interesting times to have this conversation because of some of the trends that we've seen quite recently. So this graph that I'm sharing with you guys is our internal interpretation of market demand index, right? And that's simply the supply and demand of transportation. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, you're going to see two dotted lines, one represented at about the 65 mark, and another that crosses around the 25 mark. So if the market demand index falls somewhere between 25 and 65, we would say that that is equilibrium, right? A score in that within that range means supply and demand is relatively balanced in the marketplace. Anything above 65 would represent an imbalance in supply and demand, meaning that there is more demand than there is supply of transportation. Anything when the score goes in the low 20s, then we would say that it's more of a shipper's market, and there is more available capacity than there is demand to utilize that capacity. So if you look, we've got the data points. That light green or kind of lime green line is 2021. The gray line is 2020. And we see that really in June of 2020 is when things kind of started to come off of the rails from a supply and demand standpoint. Starting the second half of 2020, we saw a tremendous increase in demand. And I don't know that it's necessarily all demand driven. A lot of it was restricted capacity, but supply and demand as a whole began to become out of kilter really in the back half of 2020. And if you follow that line, I don't know if you guys are able to see my cursor or not, but if you follow that gray line to the end of 2020, supply and demand kind of remained out of balance in 2020. And that trend continued into 2021, which is represented by that green line. And this was the first time, by the way, 2020 was the first time that we had ever seen a market demand index score that was in the triple digits. And I distinctly recall the day that we actually recorded an MDI score north of 100. Little did we know that within the coming 12 months, we would reach a score that was north of 200. So, you know, I know that it's a little bit of a worn out term to say that things that are happening are unprecedented, but certainly the imbalance in supply and demand with transportation was definitely unprecedented, and we had not seen challenges like that ever in the history of the industry. So with that, those levels remained very elevated throughout 2021. We ended in the very high 100s, which was south of 200. The MDI really peaked in May of 2021. And if we follow that blue line now, that royal blue line into 2022, we're seeing a normalization of supply and demand, right? That score is kind of trending down. That score of 137 was last week's average. It fell another, I think, 6 to 8 points this week. I just got the report, and I apologize, my presentation was not updated. I got the report last night, but it fell a little bit further last week. And while those rates while supply and demand is starting to come back in equilibrium, keep in mind we are still more than double the levels of which we would call supply and demand imbalance. So, you know, again, this commentary is relative, right? But all that being said, what's happening in the normalization of some normalization of supply and demand, along with what's happening with spot rates. Spot rates have been going down week over week for several weeks in a row. And it's got some, obviously we're seeing one-way pricing is starting to cool. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And much of it is speculative. I have to lead with that. The yield curve inverted last week. Spot prices have been going down week over week for several weeks in a row. And you have some of the commentators on the business network that are starting to throw around the R word, meaning recession. And are the spot market rates falling precipitously and continuously an indicator of a looming recession? And then when you layer on top of that the yield curve inverting last week, those are all negative signs from an economic standpoint. Keep in mind, those things do not necessarily always translate into a recession. But I think when you couple falling spot market rates with a yield curve inversion, layer on top of that fuel prices or energy prices where they're at currently, and crude hovering around $100 a barrel, what that does for the individual household disposable income, all of those things, are not great signs economically for kind of the state of commerce. So, those have got some folks spooked about, what may lie ahead in the rest of 2022. So fuel prices are other things that are making that are of concern. Is when we see fuel prices this elevated, traditionally that puts a huge dent in consumer discretionary spending. So when we see that consumer discretionary spending being moved from or transferred out of retail purchases and experiences into their gas tanks, again, that can be a sign or a leading indicator of economic contraction that could be coming. More specific to just our industry than just the general economy and what's happening with consumers, we've got converging pressures that are on the availability of drivers. Those pressures are the drivers. There are many drivers exiting the workforce for retirement or to chase other careers. There is a reduction of new entrants or new CDLs being issued. So we're seeing less graduates coming out of driving school. And also, one of the things that's probably not talked about enough, in my opinion, is the impact of the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse on the number of available drivers. And then also the wage and work-life balance pressure from other industries competing with the same labor force that professional driving represents as a career choice. So those are the pressures that are mounting on the driver workforce. If we look historically, this is a chart that really represents a handful of types of drivers in the industry. That yellow line on the bar chart, or yellow area in the bar chart, are interstate non-CDL drivers. The gray line on that, and I'm kind of going from the top to the bottom of each individual bar. The gray bar, or the gray area in the bar chart, is an interstate or intrastate CDL driver. The deep blue line is an intrastate non-CDL driver. And then the light blue or baby blue line is interstate CDL drivers, which are the number that most of us are mostly concerned with, right? That's your commercial driver that can drive a Class 8 vehicle across state lines, is that baby blue area. So if we look back in 2017 to 2020, and I don't have the 2021 statistics yet, but we started in 2017, there were about 3.2 million interstate CDL drivers. It was flat in 2018. We saw a bump up in 2019 to about 3.4 million. And then in 2020, we saw a very sharp decline from 3.4 million active interstate CDL drivers to just 3 million active interstate CDL drivers. And at the same time, we looked at some historical data on Google searches for drivers actively seeking employment, and we can see that in 2020 to 2021, there was so throughout 2020 there was a sharp decline, and that was led by shutdowns of the coronavirus and whatnot. But then suddenly we see a huge spike up towards the end of 2021, which really correlates to that MDI hitting 200 and above. If you think back about the very first chart that I looked at, that I shared with you on the market demand index, May of 2021 is when it pierced 200. So quite a bit of activity there. And looking at some data on what companies are having to do to hire drivers. So if we look back, the very top of the slide that I'm sharing with you looks at at data points for the entire industry. So the National Transportation Institute shares data with us on the number of companies or percentage of companies that were paying sign-on bonuses. In 2017, it was about 51%. In 2021, 65%, more than 65% of companies are having to pay sign-on bonuses to recruit new drivers to fill open positions. The amounts of those sign-on bonuses average about $3,600, a little over $3,600 per employee. Our internal statistics are that we are having to pay a sign-on bonus to over 72% of our open positions, and those average sign-on bonus amounts are north of $7,000 per position on average. Where we are paying a bonus, the average is somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000. So if you look historically, that's almost double what we were paying in 2017. And if you look back at the statistics in 2017, we're only paying a sign-on bonus on about 57% of our positions, as opposed to a full, over 70% in 2021. The hotspots for driver hiring are illustrated pretty well here in this map. If you look at the states in red, those are the states where the driver hiring is most difficult. You see very few green states represented on the map. You see, the Midwest between what is really the majority of where Yellowstone Park is, right? Idaho, Montana, and some of those states where there's very little economic activity. The driver hiring is not as intense. But if you look out west and in the Northeast, and in the Southwest, driver hiring is extremely competitive. So what are the challenges that are facing the driver market? One is driver attrition. So new CDL issuance in 2019, there was a total of 525,000 new CDLs that were issued. In 2020, there was only 375,000 new CDLs issued. So that's a 28.5% decline year over year from 2019 to 2020. Again, I apologize, I don't have the 2021 stats yet, but that's the largest decline in new issuances that we've had, right? So that represents supply side challenges, is that the incoming supply of new drivers is being reduced in terms of graduates and new licenses being issued by states. Another challenge that we're having with attrition are the number of drivers that are being disqualified every year because of the drug and alcohol clearinghouse. So the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse really started to, was implemented in 2020. During 2020, there were a total of almost 52,000 drivers that were disqualified due to a drug or alcohol violation that occurred during testing. Of those 52,000 drivers, 87% of those 52,000 drivers remain disqualified, meaning that only 13% of the drivers that failed either an alcohol or for alcohol or drug reasons, only 13% of them went through the required rehabilitation and reinstating policies successfully. That is a very, very small amount. So the failure rate, unfortunately, it seems to be almost permanent. Is once they're disqualified, we're approaching 90% of them that remain disqualified. So of those 52,000 roughly drivers, 52% of that 52,000, so more than half of them, were disqualified because of a positive drug test related to marijuana usage. And that's being driven by the legalization at the state level of the recreational use of marijuana, because the Department of Transportation is regulated at the federal level. The use of recreational use of marijuana is not allowed in the industry. So when you have states that are legalizing the recreational use of marijuana, and then those employees go to take a drug test to become a professional truck driver, or a random drug test as a professional truck driver, and they fail, more than half of the failures are related to the use of marijuana. So those are some of the big challenges related to why the driver pool continues to shrink. We have less people entering the workspace, and the workspace itself, the folks that are already in the industry, are either retiring or seeking other careers. And in some instances, the legalization of marijuana is disqualifying those. So there's really a lot of pressure on the availability of drivers and the graduates from new programs because of some of the threats related to autonomous vehicles and the uncertainty around how long this profession will continue to be viable for them. We're going to get we're going to get into more detail on that in just a moment when we start talking about technology and autonomous vehicles. Another pressure that our industry is facing has to do with liability and claims costs. So if we look currently, anytime that a commercial vehicle is involved in an accident, 96% of the time, at least one or more vehicles needing to be towed from the scene, which would then qualify that as a DOT reportable accident. Within those crashes, 35% of those crashes will result in one or more injuries, and 2% of those crashes, and 2% of all the crashes, the result will be one or more fatalities related to those crashes. And the reason that that's relevant is what that does to a carrier's insurance cost, and what we're seeing with liability claims and suits resulting from those crashes. So I've put together a list here of just as an illustration of instances that we're calling nuclear verdicts, right? And these are catastrophic claims in which there is a judgment or a verdict against a carrier that's resulting in extremely high verdict settlements. So you see these nuclear verdicts are anywhere from 30 to over $200 million in settlement costs. I think many people are aware of the accident that took place between Tracy Morgan and a very prominent retailer where he was injured, and the settlement on that was undisclosed. but you'd have to imagine for the settlement to be substantial enough that he would come out and say that that company did right by him and his family would mean that that was quite a substantial settlement that resulted from that crash. And what that's doing is the effects of those nuclear verdicts are having an enormous impact on insurance. So you're seeing insurance companies that are refusing to cover certain companies, certain carriers. The cost of that insurance is dramatically on the rise. Smaller trucking operators are being squeezed out, and in some instances, some companies are actually exiting. The insurance companies are actually exiting that space and saying, "We're simply not going to provide commercial vehicle coverage as one of our insurance products." So the effects of those nuclear verdicts and the increased litigation as a whole is increasing the cost of insurance and also limiting the coverage amounts that insurance companies are willing to provide to companies. Technology is another sector that's really disrupting and changing our marketplace. Most of the improvements in technology, I would tell you, are positive and are a benefit to our industry. Telematics, which is a fancy way of saying device-connected communication in the vehicle, is what telematics are. So that could be telematics could be the computer module in the truck's engine communicating back to the operator, or a monitor on the trailer, or a driver camera. So think of any connected device on the truck that is giving feedback to the management or to an oversight instrument is a telematics device. And telematics are being used really to drive change in improvements of service, lowering fuel cost and maintenance cost, reducing administrative costs, and improving the safety performance of the vehicle. So if you look at where telematics devices are used and what the intended purposes of those telematics devices are, it generally is going to fall in one of those four categories. Is the devices, the connected nature of the device is intended to provide an improvement in one of those four segments. But despite all of the improvements that we're seeing in technology and telematics devices that are being installed onto vehicles and the trailers, we're not really seeing a broad adaptation of telematics devices. I think that's the adaptation rate has to do with how fragmented our industry is. The vast majority of the transportation industry is actually smaller independent carriers. Many people are shocked to know that if you were to add up the capacity of the three largest trucking companies, we're barely a double-digit number of the total industry. The vast majority of the transportation industry is represented by independents and smaller trucking companies, and those smaller companies and independents are usually slower to invest into technology. The larger companies, I would tell you, the adoption rate of telematics and general technology is much more broad. But telematics, the fuel savings as a result of telematics, if you look at the companies that use them, and the polling suggests that 57% of the companies, or 50% of the 57% of the companies that have deployed telematics devices or some sort of mitigation device to improve fuel economy, 57% of the respondents have said that they have not seen any reduction in fuel savings. 31% of the respondents say that they've seen somewhere between a 5 and 10% savings. 9% say 11 to 20% savings. And then 3% would tell you that there is a savings of 21 to 30%. Now, my personal opinion is that the implementation of those telematics devices for fuel savings technology, if used properly and you coach your workforce properly, and you do the right things related to governing the vehicle and things of that nature. Those devices and that technology absolutely improves fuel economy. So it's really a matter of, buying the device or buying that technology and whether or not you're using it properly or not. For telematics devices that were intended to reduce the liability or accidents, 26% of respondents have said that yes, they've seen positive results. 74% have said that they've not seen an impact of that telematics device. Again, my opinion and our results speak otherwise. We would be in the 26%. That technology in terms of collision mitigation devices, forward-looking cameras, and adaptive cruise control absolutely have reduced our rear end collisions, which are our most fatal and most devastating type of accident, as well as improved driver behavior, and also corresponded with fuel savings because we reduce the following distance between our vehicle and the vehicle that's in front of us. So again, the adaptation rate of that technology leaves something to be desired from the industry, but I think that over time, these numbers will continue to get better and better. So specific to collision mitigation devices, the collision mitigation devices are really intended to one, prevent lane departure. There's devices that prevent lane departure, accidental lane departure, and prevent what we would call a side swipe merge accident. There's also technology that's video-based onboard monitoring systems or forward-facing driver cameras. And then automatic emergency braking or adaptive cruise control is another technology. And again, if we look at the survey of companies that have bought those technologies, there's only the adoption rate was not what we wanted it to be. Only at about 40% despite the benefits. So again, we have a long way to go in that. We think that this is something that is in the best interest of the motoring public. It will make the industry safer and reduce the number of accidents on the vehicles and in the highway. Another hot topic that people want to know about are autonomous and electric vehicles. So just an interesting statistic is that currently there are over 260 companies that are working on either autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles of some form throughout the globe. So some of them are more in the headlines than others. As it relates to autonomous vehicles, there's really 5 levels of automation related to autonomous vehicles, right? So level 1 automation is the hands, eyes, and brain. So the person would still requires the hands, eyes, and brain to still be engaged, but not necessarily your feet. So that would be adaptive cruise control, where you could set the cruise control on a vehicle and your vehicle would accelerate and decelerate without the pilot or the driver needing to press on the gas or the brake pedal. The system itself would recognize through a device, a radar device or sonar device at the front of the vehicle, whether it needed to slow down because the vehicle in front of it was slowing down, or whether it could speed up to whatever the cruise control is set at. So that's really level 1 automation. And that is currently in use. It's out there. It's on many, many vehicles. It's on many of our personal vehicles, and it's also on commercial vehicles. Level 2 automation is radar and / cruise control plus lane keeping. That automation is also already in use and in test. A lot of people's cars that you're buying newer in the last 5 or 6 years has that level of automation, and so do commercial vehicles. So on a highway, in a highway setting, a driver could use the adaptive cruise control and the lane keeping device, and the vehicle would steer to keep within a lane. It doesn't make lane changing decisions for you, but it keeps you in your lane and will steer the vehicle automatically, as well as keep a safe distance between you and the vehicle in front of you, and monitor your speed through cruise control. Again, that level 2 automation is already here. It's real, and it's in use on highways right now. But the driver still needs to obviously be watching the vehicle and watching traffic and be alert. And the driver has to engage their brain, obviously, on making decisions around lane changing and things of that nature. The technology is not at a place on level 2 where it makes lane changing decisions for the driver. That's level 3 automation, where the vehicle can not only maintain a safe speed and accelerate, decelerate, and also stay within a lane, but actually make lane changes make lane changing decisions without the driver. That's technology that is being tested right now, and we think within the next 5 years that could be released for public use. But the driver ultimately is still going to be responsible for the vehicle and need to be engaged, particularly in traffic situations. Level 4 automation would be self-driving in most cases, but again, the pilot still needing to be attentive and at the wheel in the event that they have to override the system. That's a little bit further down the road. That is also in development. And then, of course, level 5 automation is a true, almost pilotless vehicle, where the vehicle could maneuver itself in slow-moving traffic as well as fast-moving traffic in urban areas without the engagement of a driver. That's really the future state. There are varying degrees of timelines on when they think that type of technology would be ready and in use in the motoring public. There's a lot of obstacles that need to be overcome on that. One would be regulation. It's probably the biggest. We know that there's level 5 automation is already in test and in development, but there would have to be authorization and clearing from the Department of Transportation and other legislative bodies to make that legal. So lots of exciting things happening in the technology space that could really revolutionize our industry in years to come. So some of the unknown factors around electric trucks, or what are the market issues. There's certainly those are relevant and persistent around, does it make financial sense around the replacement of a fossil fuel burning vehicle or a combustion engine vehicle to an electric vehicle? There's obviously a return analysis that needs to be done on the replacement of a natural gas or diesel powered vehicle being able to be economically replaced by an electric vehicle. That ROI is not quite there yet. Certainly the higher fuel prices get, the more sense that makes. Other issues are around batteries, the maintenance and repair of those batteries. Predominantly, I would tell you, it's the weight of the batteries. Those batteries are very heavy, and so that there's going to need to be some improvements in the weight and size of those batteries to make it make business sense for the industry. And then power issues are another challenge in making sure that there are enough charging stations and that the electric grid is ready to offset that much energy that is currently being produced by fossil fuels and being able to support that with electricity. The electric grid is going to have to create a lot more electricity to supply that power for those vehicles, and that's going to need to scale. So those are some of the challenges going forward. My personal opinion is I think that all of these challenges will be overcome over time, but we're just not quite there yet. So for those folks that want electric vehicles to replace diesel vehicles immediately, we think that there's some time that needs to elapse before that's a a logical or practical choice for companies. There are some statistics out there related to what they believe the savings will be on autonomous vehicles. Obviously, there's a cost offset of the increased price of the vehicle because of the technology needs to offset. There needs to be an offsetting labor cost to make financial sense. As of right now, we don't really see an ROI on that. Again, these are some very high level statistics around what we think the automation of those vehicles would offset the labor cost. Currently, labor costs are going in the opposite direction. They're not going down, they're going up. So, it's going to be some time before the cost of that technology would offset the labor cost to make it break even from an ROI standpoint for a company. Other technologies being used around automation is vehicle platooning. That's simply a truck train, if you will. So the vehicle that leads the convoy is operated with a driver, and in this illustration here, the 3 vehicles below it are simply connected to that vehicle, and whatever the lead vehicle does, the following 3 vehicles are simply mimicking. So no, there's only a driver in the lead vehicle, and the other 3 vehicles are really just following the first vehicle. That makes sense in a very long haul scenario. So, I think, if you're moving goods from California to Texas or something of that nature, where there's a very, very long length of haul, vehicle platooning could be a solution. But again, there's a lot of testing that needs to be done and is being done in some of those states. There are some benefits to that would be, reducing what they've seen as rear end collisions could be reduced, as well as the drag coefficient of those vehicles following one another could improve some fuel economy on those trucks. Is that the future? It's one of the solutions. Which one is going to be predominant? Is it going to be that, or is it going to be autonomous vehicles? That's yet to be seen at this point. Other technology that's being developed, obviously, is natural gas trucks or something that are still in development. Solar paneled powered vehicles that are also battery operated, and then also autonomous trailers, which is really somewhat of a gimmick. I mean, there's a truck in front of it; it just doesn't look like a truck. But autonomous trailers are another technology that's being developed as a way to drive innovation within the space. Our position is that, we're watching all of these technologies be developed and looking at the successes. We are piloting and we are participating in a lot of these different technologies, and we want to wait and see which technology becomes prevalent and most successful, and that would be the technology that I think that we're going to get behind. I don't think that there's going to be, my personal opinion, I don't think that there's going to be one winner. I think that there will be several winners and several technologies that are going to prevail as being the predominant industry leading technologies, whether it relates to the collision mitigation devices or what telematics devices prove to be more effective or most effective, and the automation on the vehicles. Is it Waymo that wins out in the end versus Nikolai or some of the other vehicles, or Nikola, sorry, or some of the other autonomous vehicle manufacturers? That's yet to be seen. But a lot going on within our industry. Some headwinds related to driver availability and supply chain crunches and available capacity, and then there's some tailwinds related to technology development and automation that we think are going to make things easier for us in years to come. But at this moment, we're kind of living in a world where we're having to deal with both the headwinds and the tailwinds and make the best of the opportunities that we have in front of us at this moment. But that concludes my presentation. Our outlook is that we think that overall supply and demand, when we think back about the equilibrium that was represented in the first slide, We think it's probably going to remain above that 65 mark for the remainder of 2022. The pressures on the driver market and fuel are going to continue to be challenges. And we think that as a whole, shippers are going to need to make some strategic decisions to secure dependable capacity to make sure that their shelves are stocked and that their customers are getting the experience that they would want them to have throughout the rest of 2022 and 2023.
Raul, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I want to open it up to our audience and see if anybody has any questions for you. And while they're typing in their questions, I am wondering how you guys are sort of forecasting the impact that the war in Russia will have on gas prices and overall cost of trucking.
Well, the price of fuel is going to remain, we believe, is going to remain elevated. Our concern is, or not our concern, but our insights tell us that we don't believe that the Eurozone is going to embrace Russian petroleum anytime soon, given what's happened with Ukraine. And that's going to force them to try and source those fossil fuels elsewhere. And the United States is one of the largest producers of fossil fuels in the world. So, you know, that's going to lend itself to higher fuel prices, possibly for an extended period of time. You know, one of the risks of those elevated fuel prices are of course economic risks and what that does to consumers and consumers' disposable incomes. And when you compound that with inflation that is, you know, above 6%, you know, that there is some economic threat that lives within that.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were talking about platooning, I was wondering, even with all the technologies you were talking about and the innovations that are coming online, could you easily break that into what you see in a year ahead of us? It'll be 10% platooning, 10% level 3, 2% level 4. Does that make sense? How do you see it shaping out?
It would be difficult, rather than saying or trying to allocate percentages into any specific technology. I can tell you where most of the emphasis right now is, whether we're talking about true autonomous or platooning, is in long length of haul segments. So this is public information, so I don't mind sharing it. Waymo is doing some tests for autonomous vehicle deliveries between, for example, Houston and Dallas, right? That is a very long stretch of highway, approximately 230 miles. That's in a long straight line, and autonomous vehicles or autonomous driving in segments like that, or think about between California and Texas or other very long stretches of highway. That's the low-hanging fruit is how I would describe it. And the companies that are pursuing autonomous technology, whether that's through platooning or true autonomous pilotless vehicles, that's the segment where they feel like they can drive value the fastest, and there's the least barriers to entry from a regulatory standpoint. We think that you know, I would tell you that that's where the effort is being put, is how can they give a solution to companies for that line haul piece.
Gotcha. Okay, so going back to the regulation, I think this is one issue that we are seeing just critical right now. Regulation around the drivers and drug use. So what are you seeing in terms of changes for that moving forward? And how will that impact? Because I know that a lot of the people who are on the call now are dealing with those issues and keeping retaining workers with the same sorts of issues.
Yeah, that's a really tough question to answer, Jennifer, because for example, if you run a warehouse, and not to say that a warehouse is without risk, because those folks that operate inside of a warehouse are, operating forklifts and very heavy equipment that potentially could be lethal. But you're not on a public road, so your risk is contained within the four walls of your business. For transportation companies, one, the issue is that we don't believe that there is at this moment any initiative to allow the federal, we don't see the federal regulations changing to allow the use of marijuana for a commercial vehicle operator. And the other issue is, from the company standpoint, is, when we operate our vehicle, it's on a public road. So we're not just dealing with internal risk. There's a tremendous amount of external risk related to putting our vehicles next to people's families.
Sure. So I just allowed David to come on. He had his hand raised. So David, you have a question for Raul? And if you take yourself off mute, we'll let you have the floor. Maybe he didn't mean to raise his hand, or maybe he, maybe he. All right. Well, thank you so much, Raul. This has been a fantastic presentation, very informative, very insightful, a lot of great information packed into a short amount of time. So really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for attending.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Have a great afternoon. Bye.